Hey guys, the Comics Kid 2099 here. Once again, I'm spending Saturday talking about an episode of a superhero animated series. And today, I'm talking about the Batman the Animated Series episode, What is Reality? So strap yourselves in, because before I get into the review, I'm going to sum up the episode first. So if you need to rewatch the episode, do so. You have been warned. Various bizarre computer-related crimes are popping up across Gotham City with riddles attached to them. While this is going on, all of the information on Edward Nygma is vanishing. A giant computer machine is delivered to police headquarters, and through some raging stupidity of Robin, Commissioner Gordon is at Riddler's mercy in cyberspace. So now Batman must journey into cyberspace to save the Commissioner. Okay, so I had heard some folks say that this episode was really awful, so when I went into it, I braced myself for the worst. And let me say, this isn't the worst. In fact, just a quick cursory glance on the internet shows that at least two different websites that compile their own lists of the top 10 worst Batman episodes did not include this episode among them. So it's not like this is soul-crushing and hard to get through or anything like that, but that doesn't mean that it's a good episode. But first, let me go ahead and talk about the stuff that I did like in this episode, because that won't take very long. One, I really like that Riddler's reason for destroying all physical evidence of Edward Nygma is ultimately a very petty one. He doesn't have some kind of evil plan going on like when Lex Luthor erased all evidence of his criminal past in the Superman comics of the late 90s. It basically comes down to Riddler feeling embarrassed at his defeat at the hands of Batman in his previous appearance, and so he just wanted to pretend that it didn't happen and entirely become the Riddler. I like that. Now, you could argue, with a pretty good case mind you, that Riddler's goons trying to destroy evidence of Nygma was being played up like it was a pretty big part of the plot, and ultimately it had nothing to do with the rest of the episode. And ordinarily you would be right. This would be a huge problem, narratively speaking, if the rest of the episode was any good. But I think since this is just about the only part of the episode that I did like, the fact that this distances itself from the rest of the episode is only a good thing. The other big thing that I liked about this episode is the feeling that Robin actually has some skills to bring to the table and isn't completely made redundant by Batman. I don't exactly know when it got started, but at some point, I would say within the last 30 years, Batman became this invincible, unstoppable force who is a master of all trades. He can literally be the best at anything: linguistics, lockpicking, defusing bombs, etc. And when you build up Batman as being this good at everything, it makes his sidekick redundant. Now, you might point to the story Batman: A Lonely Place of Dying and say that Robin's reason for existing is to keep Batman from becoming a violent sociopath. And sure, that's a reason, but if that's the only reason, you have to think that he wouldn't even need to suit up and go out into the field. He could just stay in the cave and talk to Bruce through an earpiece, like Oracle does. He could tell stupid, corny jokes to keep Batman from going over the edge, and he'd be done. But no, that doesn't happen. What I like about this episode is that Batman isn't superhumanly gifted at everything under the sun. For instance, he doesn't seem to know anything about astronomy, but Robin does. Teamwork. Likewise, of the two, Batman seems to be the better detective, while Dick is better at dealing with computers. Up until now, I hadn't really gotten the feeling that Dick had a separate skill set from Batman. Since he hadn't even been in this series that many times by this point, and one of his few appearances was the two-part Robin's Reckoning, you could pretty easily be forgiven if you thought that his only reason for working with Batman was to cheer him up. And that is about all I did like from this episode. Now on to what I did not like. One, when you separate Riddler trying to erase his past from everything else that he's doing, you soon realize that there's not a whole lot else that he is doing here. He delivers a computer to the police station, and he essentially kidnaps the police commissioner. But why? What has he ever done to you? If he only does this to lure Batman into a trap, fine, I get that. But then I feel like there's about a bazillion other easier, less expensive ways you could go about doing that than building an entire virtual reality. And maybe his reasoning was that Batman really is unbeatable in the real world, so maybe if he could lure him into a virtual reality, then he'd have an edge over him. And that might have been a neat idea, but I still don't think that this episode did a great job of fleshing out his reason for doing what he does in this episode. It almost feels like erasing his history was his main goal, and that fighting Batman and kidnapping Gordon was just secondary, so that the episode could have more of a plot. Which then brings me to ask, why couldn't the entire plot of the episode have been Riddler erasing any evidence of his past, so that he could fully become the Riddler? This would have been a really interesting idea, in my humble, and it would have been a nice chance to parallel Riddler with Batman, who is more experienced in dealing with the double life, and you could show just why the double life is so necessary for Batman. It wouldn't have even needed to be a very complex story. Like my creative writing professor used to say, keep it simple, stupid. And that's my big problem with this episode, I think. It's far too complex. Most of Riddler's evil scheme relies on Robin being stupid. He doesn't catch the exterior modem that should have been one of the first things that he noticed, and then he has Gordon put the helmet on, which I don't buy for one moment that an old-timey guy like Jim Gordon, who would probably think that a rotary telephone would be too newfangled, would be willing to put on that virtual reality helmet. Basically, in this episode, the only reason that Riddler even came close to having a victory isn't because he's intelligent, it's because everyone else in Gotham is stupid. And then there's the final thing. The fact that this episode builds so much of itself around virtual reality really dates it in the worst way, which isn't immediately a bad thing, mind you. This series has always been a combination of different eras. You've got fancy high-tech stuff like the Riddler's computer in this episode, but then the fashion and the architecture all come right out of the 1940s. So in theory, it isn't a problem that this episode isn't completely 100% modern, especially when you consider that it was made over 20 years ago. But in execution, this episode just feels incredibly silly. Yes, there's a certain amount of silly expected to be had in a series where a grown man dresses like he does and punches other grown men dressing like they do, but this is a whole new level of absurd. It's one of those things where people in the early 1990s knew that the internet was a thing, but they didn't really know anything about it at all, and so they just faked it based on what they saw in movies and TV shows, and as a result, nothing here even feels plausible on any level. I can buy that a grown man would dress up like a bat and punch other bad guys dressed in funny costumes. There's a certain sense of believability to that. That certain sense of believability is completely missing in the plot of this episode, though. And I think even more than this episode being dated, my big problem with this episode is that the entire climax feels like a cheat because there are no established rules in the world of virtual reality. Anything can happen, and so anything does happen. Batman can make his hands into giant sledgehammers. Okay, when anything can happen and does happen, it takes away the suspense in the worst way, and I think that's really my main beef with this whole section of the episode. That's really about all I have to say about this episode, guys. Not the worst episode this series has thrown at us, but definitely not the best. What did you guys think of it, though? Like it? Hate it? Let me know in the comments below. And what did you think of this review? If you liked it or didn't, be sure to let me know. Also, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you did like this review, then be sure to check out other videos like this, like next Saturday, where I'll be discussing an episode of Batman Beyond. And the weekend after that, I'll be talking about another episode of Batman the Animated Series. And throughout the week, I'll be doing other kinds of videos, so be sure to check those out as well. Until then, I hope you guys have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you later.